Sunday. It is another beautiful Sunday, October 29th, 2023. We welcome all of you here with us as we've really gone through a lot of subjects over the past 3 years. And here we are speaking about a very unique subject. Now, that subject that we originally planned for today, we will be speaking about it. However, unfortunately, Dr. Najati Al-Khan will un unfortunately be uh, taking care of his sick family member, and he's unable to join us. With that being said, we are very grateful to Peter Terry to not just have a topic ready, but to have a topic so related to the topic we really originally wanted to speak about. And the topic today is what happens when things go really wrong? What do Baha'is do about it? Now, what do Baha'is do when things go really wrong? They rely on the institutions. And it's really important to explain here because we're going to be talking about a subject that's very uncomfortable, but it's very much in line with the original subject. And that is about covenant breaking. What is a covenant breaker? What does that mean, the act of covenant breaking in the Bahá'í Faith? What does it entail? What's the circumstances? What does that really mean to someone who knows nothing about this subject? Mr. Peter Terry has been with us on various sessions. He's organized several sessions with us. He has still sessions going on through the Firm Foundation Academy, which we welcome all of you to visit this website, firm-foundationacademy.org. Now, with all this being said, first correct me, Peter. It's the website, right? Where I just said, the Firm-Foundation Academy, or firm-foundation.org. I made a mistake.
Yeah, that's fine. But if they want to communicate with me, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if you want to send me a message of any kind, this is my personal email, which is the way to reach me. Okay? It is now sent to everyone.
peterry19@gmail.com. And thank you, Jeremiah, for sharing the website as well. It is firm-foundation.org. For the Firm Foundation Academy, firm-foundation.org. Thank you, Jeremiah, so much. With that being said, just a quick introduction for Peter. Peter is a very prolific academic. He's produced a lot of content, and not just written content. He's created wonderful pieces as it relates to music. He's shared his voice, which you can find him online if you look hard enough, singing opera, amazing. He's so beautiful with musical instruments. And not just that, he's been very sacrificial with his time to make available various topics of knowledge for the Baha'is who take the time simply to ask. With that being said, this subject today, we are very thankful to Mr. Peter Terry for being available on such short notice. We are speaking about less than 2 hours of time to prepare for this talk. But here's the thing. He already has the subject ready. He's had it ready for some time. And what's even better is that all of us students here, where we're learning together, are going to have some interesting questions. And that is going to really affect the direction we take. With that being said, we're going to be relying on the writings itself. What did the Baha'i writings say in the subject? And that is enough because we're all understanding together, we're learning together, and that's the spirit of these sessions. It's a real Baha'i exploration. We're exploring the subject together. With that being said, Peter, welcome. I understand that you may want to share your screen. If so, please, we are happy to see it, however way you wish to perform it today. So while Peter's getting that together, yes, we hear you. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. No, I don't. I'm not going to share a screen, and it's because although I've written about this topic, this morning I want to talk. I don't want to go off of a written script, for various reasons. And the first reason is this, that I don't want you all to run for the exit door when someone says they're going to talk about covenant breaking, because there are a couple of issues with covenant breaking, even talking about it in public. One thing is that a lot of Baha'is don't feel comfortable with the topic at all and would prefer that we never mention it again. All right. Another real issue is that people who have heard talks about this or have discussed it privately with their friends have heard everything, and they feel like, oh no, not again. I don't want to be over this same terrain for the 100th time or 1,000th time. So that's another issue. Another issue is that some people feel very uncomfortable about this being talked about in public because do we really want people to have this image of the Baha'is that we even have a belief like this? There are a lot of conflicts. There's a lot of confusion. And in addition to this, we're not just talking about one covenant. And it's very important for us to have a clear understanding of what it means to be a covenant breaker. And so that's what I want to address. And the reason why I decided to talk about this morning is because Najati was going to talk about an absolutely horrific event that happened in history, our history, where a group of 7 very deepened, faithful Baha'is took it upon themselves to kill a group of people who were admittedly very difficult to deal with, who had been attacking the faith and the leadership of the faith and causing all kinds of very unpleasant things to happen. But they killed them. And when this was, when it came to public knowledge that this had happened, the reaction of the Ottoman government was very severe. And Baha'u'lláh was called in for interrogation. Abdu'l-Baha was called in for interrogation. A lot of the Baha'is were held under very strict circumstances. They would not allow them to move about because what's going to happen next? This was so atypical for Baha'is to behave like this. So the question was, how do we respond to this? And what has it got to do with other instances of covenant breaking, which did not result in people being killed? So first of all, I want to get the big picture. I want to suggest that there are 2 major covenants that we're dealing with here. One is the covenant with God, which is the covenant with all of humanity through all of the manifestations of God. This is written about in every holy book, from the Bible through the Quran, through the Babi and Baha'i writings. We know about this. In case we get rusty on it, there are compilations written about it. There are wonderful books written about it. It's sometimes called the Universal Covenant or the Greater Covenant. And we tend very often as Baha'is to sort of neglect this particular topic when we're talking with people who don't know about the faith or who are just brand new believers. But it's a very important topic because it's important for us to understand that our relationship with our Creator is actually a relationship that has been set down in writing, and that with terms, that it's not like this open-ended relationship of you do whatever you want, I'll do whatever I want. That relationship has been stipulated in very specific language about what is expected of us as creatures of the Creator. And those requirements that we have are voluntary in the sense that we have free will because the Creator made us with free will. It's not like free will is something we sort of discovered for ourselves. We were made that way. And so we are not obligated to do what the manifestation tells us to do. Any manifestation. We're not forced to do so. But there are consequences for not doing so. And this is the law of the world. This is the way everything in reality works. If you go against the grain, if you go against the way that things are set up, there will be negative consequences. And if you go with the grain and the way things are designed, then things go very smoothly for you. And of course, people will immediately say, well, How about all of those anomalies when you're doing just the right things and then something bad happens to you? Well, this is a good example, because when we are part of a community and the community is doing pretty well, we're mostly nice people and we're doing good things. We're helping other people out in their lives. And then somebody who is a fellow believer, someone we know well, someone we love and respect, does something that is completely contrary to the spirit and letter of the Baha'i teachings. What do we do? What do we do? How can we wrap our heads around that? How is it possible for that person to let themselves go in that way, to make that transgression? And I think we need to look at the two covenants separately. The covenant with God is something that is binding on all human beings. And all human beings have this option of either agreeing or disagreeing, but they pay the consequences. The covenant of Baha'u'lláh is very specific to us, for those people who have recognized Baha'u'lláh and committed themselves by that recognition to follow his teachings. That covenant does not pertain to the whole world. So we should never conflate the two and think that somebody who's not a Baha'i, who has ideas that are different from ours, behaviors that are different from ours, has any similarity to somebody who is a Baha'i who has gone off the path and has decided that they're going to do something that is absolutely contrary to the Baha'i teachings. Those two things have to be kept separate, and I think sometimes we're just human and we mix things up. And it's very important that when we're talking with our young Baha'i friends, and also when we're talking with seekers and friends of the faith, that we make this distinction so that they don't come to have this view that we're a closed community, that we're a judgmental community, they're a community full of hate, full of suspicion. Good grief. If that's what we are, we have no business existing. There shouldn't be a Baha'i faith. We don't need another religion like that, friends. I mean, this is, Abdu'l-Baha said this many, many times. If religion is not conducive to love and unity, we don't need it. Let's just do without religion. He's very bold in his statements, and he made them in the West, where we tend to take things at face value. We weren't looking for this spiritual message underneath. We were like really hearing him the way he was talking. And this is what he said to us. So, if we can separate the two covenants, that's really going to be helpful to us in communicating this idea to other people. So there are boundaries. Really what the covenant is about is boundaries. There are boundaries that our parents set with us, that we set with our children. There are boundaries also in the relationship between God and his creation, his human creation, because we do have free will, because we can choose for ourselves. So therefore they need to know in this direction is not good thing, and go in that direction and it's a good thing, so that we have the guidance to make a decision for ourselves. I think this is the wonderful wisdom of that second chapter of Genesis story of Adam and Eve. There are all kinds of interpretations that are nonsense, but the interpretation that understands that this is talking about basic human nature. Human nature is we're in paradise and we're told, don't eat the fruit of that tree, it's bad for you. And so what do? We eat the tree. We eat the fruit of the tree that's bad for us, because that's what we are. As human beings, we often digress, but we have the opportunity to come back. We have the opportunity to change our path throughout our lives. So I've talked enough about, I think, this major plan, this eternal, essential covenant of God. And then there's the very specific Baha'i covenant. And the Baha'i covenant is revolutionary. no previous dispensation included this kind of written covenant that specified so clearly what the intentions of the founder were. Like in the Gospels, there's one statement in one of the 4 canonical Gospels that has any allusion to what will happen after Jesus dies. One statement. And that statement is so vague, it could be understood and has been understood in so many different ways. I mean, consider Christianity is the largest religion in the world, has more followers than any other, and they can't agree about what that one statement means. So obviously, that was not a covenant. That was not an effective agreement if the intention was to unite the community. And that clearly was not the intention. The intention of having a unity of the entire community is something that became progressively more elaborated by the manifestations. In the case of Islam, you had a covenant, but the covenant was not written. The covenant was not written with, the believers did not acknowledge the leadership, the appointment of Ali as being the imam, as being the next leader of the Muslim community. And consequently, up until the present time, we're talking about 90% or more of Muslims are not Shi'i, are not recognizers of the imams. 90%, all right? So, we have to put that in context when we think about Shi'i Islam and the influence it had on the development of the faith, because that was a minoritarian influence. That is not from the Sunni community, which is a very important factor for us to consider. So here we have the covenant of Baha'u'lláh, and the covenant of Baha'u'lláh is stipulating so very clearly, the person who's in charge after me is my eldest son, Abdul-Baha. And there's so much evidence for this position that it's almost it's not necessary for us to go through it. All of you have done your reading. You understand it's in the Kitab-i Aqdas, it's in the Tablet of the Branch, and most important, it's in the Kitab-i Ad. And furthermore, it was acknowledged by virtually the entire Baha'i community when it happened. Because Abdul-Baha had been exercising leadership as the first son and the chosen successor. He had been playing that role for decades before he was appointed. So everybody knew if you want to get something done, and you want to do something for the faith, you go to Abdul-Baha because he's going to tell you how to do it. Because Baha'u'lláh is busy revealing tablets, so don't mess with him. You have to show respect for the manifestation. You have a problem, go to Abdul-Baha. So it was clear to everybody, even before it was put in writing, this is the way things are going to go. I mean, consider who wrote a treatise that could be regarded as authoritative Baha'i scripture, apart from from Abdul-Baha. Nobody did. We don't have any treatises written by any other Baha'is from that whole period when Baha'u'lláh was a manifestation and was writing tablets right and left. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of tablets. A friend recently told me that at the British Library, he found 10,000 tablets of Baha'u'lláh. So, Baha'u'lláh really wrote a great deal. But then you have The Secret of Divine Civilization, which came out in 1875. Why would you have a treatise of that importance written by your son unless you regarded your son as your representative to the world? So I think you get my point. I think the evidence is very clear for Abdul-Baha. Then Abdul-Baha writes his will and testament, and the will and testament was very clear in appointing Shoghi Effendi. There's no ambiguity about that. So let's look at the opposition to those covenants, because there was the opposition to the covenant of the Bab, which I haven't even mentioned. There's a lot of controversy about whether the Bab actually wrote a will and testament. The document is not fully corroborated in any way. So it may be authentic, it may not be authentic. But in any case, it doesn't come right out and say, Subi Azal is my representative and he's going to run the show. It doesn't say that. Okay. It has some nice language, flowery language, that can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. Okay. So in what you have as far as establishing the covenant of Baha'u'lláh, the authenticity of Baha'u'lláh, the authority of Baha'u'lláh as a manifestation, you have innumerable references in the Persian Bayan to him whom God shall make manifest. Very clear, all of those references. And then you have 25 people who claim to be him whom God shall make manifest. And all of them clearly aren't the person they claim to be. And that becomes really apparent to the Babis. And then Baha'u'lláh gradually makes his claims known. But even before he stated any of those claims, people recognized who he was. I mean, we have account after account after account of people who recognize Baha'u'lláh, that he was him whom God shall make manifest, before he ever said a word about it. And this is an important thing for us to recognize, because once he did say it, he said it to a very small group of people, and then the word got out gradually. So it wasn't like there was some judgment day when he told everybody, I am him whom God shall make manifest. If you don't follow me, you're not following God. He didn't do that. Baha'u'lláh, this is not Baha'u'llah's way of doing things. He's a gradualist. He does things according to the capacity of the people, and he's very loving and forgiving. And a great indication of that is the number one breaker of the covenant of the Bab with him, concerning him whom God shall make manifest, was his own half-brother. And in the last book that he wrote, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, he calls upon his half-brother to come back to him. I'll forgive you. Come, follow me. Take the right path. He could have written him off 20, 30 years earlier, and he didn't. He was trying to bring him back to the covenant to the end of his life. And this is a very important thing for us to understand, because sometimes we don't get why did Shoghi Effendi wait so long to inform the Baha'i community of the covenant breaking of members of his family? Why did Abdul Baha take so long before he informed people of the covenant breaking of those people who were engaged in that activity during his mission? It's very simple. It's because they're not lawyers. They're not judges. They are loving spiritual leaders, and they want to leave open the opportunity for people to come back, people to realize the errors of their ways and come back to the covenant, because the covenant is so important. So we, having established, this is the basis of the covenant of Baha'u'lláh, are these texts, and the texts appoint one person. All right. And then the texts, because they appointed that one person, then that one person left a will, and that will appointed one person, you have continuity. You have rock solid evidence for your covenant. There's no question about it. We're not in the situation of Christianity or of Islam where anybody can contest this. It's a fact. And this is revolutionary. And the reason why, so when Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi talk about this is a covenant unlike any previously in humanity, in the history of humanity, that this is what they're talking about. This is airtight. So then you have people who, even though it's airtight, go against it. So what are you going to do? You set up boundaries, right? The purpose of setting up boundaries is to protect people, is to protect the sanctity of the teachings, for one thing, and the unity of the community. And when somebody violates those boundaries, there are repercussions. There are repercussions for the people who are observing those boundaries. And I'm not just talking about people who are like weak in faith, okay? So that's one of the things you might say, well, it's going to be damaging because those who are, who are not firm in their faith are going to be tempted to, they're going to have doubts, and their commitment will flag. And so you're going to have this pernicious effect on their spiritual development. Well, that's true. But I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about the staid, super confident Baha'is, the Baha'is who are completely untouched by all of that nonsense, by any sort of challenge to the legitimacy or authenticity or infallibility of the leader of the faith. Those people are affected too, because how can they teach the faith with confidence when they know that so many of the people that they teach the faith to are aware of covenant breaking, are aware that there are other Baha'is, supposedly Baha'is, who are saying something different? Because look, everybody else in the world, except for the Baha'is, expect there to be a variety of potentially legitimate points of view coming out of any religion. Because in every other religion, it's fragmented. There's no unity of doctrine in Christianity. There's no unity of doctrine in Islam. Even when we teach introductory courses in those religions, we're actually misrepresenting the facts. The facts are that you have thousands and millions of different opinions about what's real and what's not real. And actually all of them could be wrong, because there is no authoritative clarification of doctrine in either Christianity or Islam. I mean, that's the fact. Whereas in the case of the faith, we have Abdu'l-Baha clarifying every question that came to him. He didn't shy away from anything, and neither did the Guardian. And the Guardian was so scrupulous about this. He was so careful to base his pronouncements of definitive Baha'i doctrine on what he had read or heard from Abdu'l-Baha or read from Baha'u'lláh. He went back to the sources. The Guardian was not sitting there sort of inventing stuff, So we shouldn't regard the Guardian as some sort of an oracle who just like spontaneously had ideas that no. He often says that if it's not already in the teachings, I don't have an opinion about it. And even if I did have an opinion, it's not binding, because that is not my role. My role is to clarify what is already settled in the writings of the manifestation and the writings of his appointed interpreter. So we have now when we consider covenant breaking as a particular event, this horrible event where 7 of the Baha'is kill covenant breakers. All right. So what happens when Baha'is kill people who are breaking the covenant? Well, it's pretty simple. They're breaking the covenant by killing people who broke the covenant. You see, it's a real, and this has gone on for millennia in other religions. It is completely unacceptable in this religion, because we can't possibly have a unity of mankind if the religion that's leading the way is doing the same nonsense that happened in the past. And not only doing the same nonsense, but justifying it. So there cannot be any justification for killing people because they disagree with us, even if they disagree with the the covenant of Baha'u'lláh. No justification. In fact, the Guardian was very clear about this. We must treat covenant breakers with absolute justice. If you've got business dealings with a covenant breaker, you've got to treat them properly. You treat them with courtesy. What you don't do is become best friends with them, because our friends influence us. Whether we want them to or not, they influence us. And we don't want to be influenced by somebody who has made that big spiritual mistake. Okay? So when I think it's important for us to have this understanding when we're talking with our new believers and with our seekers, that this is about boundaries and it's about authenticity. Anybody could call themselves a Baha'i, anybody. But there are criteria for being a Baha'i. Baha'u'lláh set forth criteria. Abdu'l-Baha set forth criteria. Shoghi Effendi set forth criteria. And the House of Justice has upheld all of those criteria. And we need to understand that this sacred trust of identifying ourselves with the most recent manifestation is just that. This is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of being authentic in our representation of what someone else said, right? I'm a classical musician. I can't just sing a Bach aria or a part in an opera the way I want to do it. My validity as a singer is based upon the degree to which I can do justice to the great composition of a composer, right? That if I am able to interpret his music and people feel like, wow, that's such a beautiful interpretation, it's not because I was creative. It was because I did it the way the composer intended. And all the really great performers of classical music do that. You know, all of the greatest ones, you feel as if you're hearing the composer himself. That's what we are, Baha'is. Baha'is need to be singing the tune, the melody of Baha'u'lláh, and singing it as close as we possibly can to the way Baha'u'lláh sings it, because he's the manifestation. Otherwise, let's not call ourselves Baha'is. Let's call ourselves people, right? Because there's a whole lot less. I can be whoever I want. Yes, I live in America. Thank God for that. I've got that choice. I can reinvent myself every day if I want to, you know? And that's very appealing, by the way. It's very appealing to most of us who, you know, were converts in you know, as adults. We're converts to the faith. We've spent all these years making all of our own decisions and doing whatever we wanted. And then suddenly it's like, what? You know, there are expectations of me. And not only expectations, but the more I read, the more expectations I find. And the more challenging those expectations are, you know, because I somehow could avoid the ones that were the most challenging for a long time by, let's see, well, I could read the public addresses of Abdu'l-Baha, where he was very gentle on people, okay? Or, you know, I could read things about administration, and Americans love administration, so that's not a problem, you know? But then when you get into the ethical teachings, whoo, boy, now you're getting really challenged. And particularly if you read them and you really think about their consequences. The Advent of Divine Justice is a letter that Baha'is will be reading for the next 1,000 years. And we're going to read parts of it and we're going to turn white. And we're going to be sweating. We're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, this requires me to do some changing now, you know? And we're going to feel that way because they're so challenging to us. So I think it's important that we understand the whole concept of boundaries and the concept that that when we talk about the unity of mankind and the net we cast is very wide. We want to invite everybody to become a Baha'i. By the way, that includes covenant breakers. They are welcome to become members of the Baha'i community, but there are things that you have to do in order to be a member of this community. There are things you have to do to be pleasing to Baha'u'lláh. And that's really what it comes down to. No, the manifestation sets forth criteria. And, you know, it takes all of us working on it every day to come closer to those standards. You don't have to do everything in one weekend. You know, in fact, there is nobody who succeeds in doing that. But you have to work at it. And if you don't work at it, then, and you just rest on your laurels, or like some of us, I'm not a descendant of a martyr, but I know that there are descendants of martyrs who love to talk about how, you know, this or that relative was a martyr, but you have to become a martyr. It's literally, you know, as Jesus said in the Gospels, he said, take up your cross and follow me. You know, you're not going to be a follower of Jesus unless you take up your cross. You've got to be willing to be crucified for the truth. If you're willing to be crucified, then you're a true believer. Then you're a true follower, because that's where he ended up, and you could end up there. And there's a lot of truth. Baha'u'lláh expresses himself very forcefully to his followers in the same way. This has got to be your end all. This has got to be, and I think if people understand that, then they will understand the whole concept of covenant breaking, and the fact that there are people who break the covenant, who break the universal covenant every day. And then there are people who break the covenant with Baha'u'lláh, and that we have to protect ourselves from covenant breaking. And that's not just a matter of association. It's a matter of spiritual fortitude. It's a matter of loyalty. Like when Baha'u'lláh says, when he says that belief in him, recognition of him, is paired directly with following his teachings, he means business here. It's not optional. It's required. And so when we think, for example, there's actually a passage in the Kitab-i Aqdas which we should take very seriously. It says, recite the words of God every morning and every evening. Whoever does not follow this has not been loyal to the covenant of God. Oh boy, my friends, we better be paying attention to that. You know, we should, because just because we've already accepted that we're doing, you know, our obligatory prayer, and we're chanting Allah upon 95 times a day, and we say, well, I don't drink wine, and I don't smoke cigarettes, and and I'm faithful to my spouse, and all right, fine. We've got a whole list of things that we're doing right, but we better go back to the writings and find out how we can improve. And that's where I think it's important for us to understand that covenant breaking is a tendency in every human being. It's part of our genetics, if you will. It's what Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. And all of us, to some degree, fall into that category. And the whole purpose of taking ourselves to account every day is so that we recognize where we went wrong during that day. And the next day, we can maybe avoid doing the same stupid things that we did today. And obviously, if it was a hopeless matter, then we wouldn't be asked to do it. But we can do it. We can do it. And we all of us, we meet people all the time who we know are much closer to doing the will of God with their lives every day. We meet them and they're an inspiration. We should never feel like, we have to beat ourselves up for not being as spiritual as Mother Teresa. It's okay. But be inspired by Mother Teresa, because what Mother Teresa was doing was really good. It's because good is an objective thing. In the book of Genesis, at the very beginning, it says God created this and God created that, and each time it says, and it was good. So the world that God has created is magnificent, and we human beings are magnificent, absolutely, miraculous creatures. And look at what we do by the gift of God, all of the gifts that we are developing, and now on a level that humanity has probably never developed before. But we still can't rest on our laurels and think, well, I've done enough. It's good enough for me. It's never good enough. You always want to do better. And you always want to be, because we're doing this all, and this is totally related to the whole question of the covenant and covenant breaking. It essentially comes down to this one thing that is so important that it's found in every religion. Obey my commandments for love of my beauty. This is love. It's all about love. When we break the commandments, when we show disloyalty to the manifestation, that's not a loving action. We're full of self-love or the love of somebody else, but not love for the manifestation, not love for God. God wants us to be united, wants us to be together, and wants us to be together in our love of him and of each other. That doesn't happen when we decide that we're going to separate ourselves from other people and do it our way. Because I can't. So I think I've said what I wanted to say, and I want to open it up to you to react, respond, question, whatever you'd like. Okay? So John, why don't you let's see, there's a way to unmute people so that they can actually talk. Can
Yes,
you
Peter.
unmute everybody and then ask people to hold up hands if they want to speak, because we have a large enough cohort here that we wouldn't want to have everybody talk at the same time.
Sure. So everyone who's with us, please, I would humbly request that you in the chat provide your question, and in order we can call on you. In addition to that, of course, we understand some people need to raise their hand so they can be asked to speak. Please do so, raise your hand, and we can call on you to speak as well and ask you to unmute. One question for you, Peter, is this. Please explain, and it's a very, very good explanation you've given. It's very to the point, providing us places such as the quote from the Akdas about faithfulness to the covenant. Very, very important citation. Please explain how we as Baha'is, or just in general, people who are just exposed now to the faith, how we can engage in this understanding moving forward, where people are not used to this idea of, ultimately speaking, set of exclusionary principles that if this doesn't happen, then this is what results. How do we manage that? Is this something like anything that exists in society today? Can we compare it to anything, or is this completely off on a subject on a pedestal of its own.
No, no. It's related, it's reflected in everything. There's no government, there's no business, there's no family, there's no institution in the world that is operated without understandings of where the boundaries are and without accountability for actually observing those boundaries. You can't get anything done without that. In fact, I remember in this interview with this composer and the person who interviewed them didn't know anything about composing but assumed that, oh, well, it's all about creativity. So isn't this, nice that you can just come up with these ideas, and then you write them down and then people can play the music? And he said, no, it has nothing to, it's the exact opposite. I'm bringing order to chaos because sounds are not music. Music is beautiful sounds that go together with each other. And that's hard work. That requires boundaries. That requires order. that requires, therefore, the internalization and the development of this capacity to appreciate the order that is in the world already. Now, I have somebody who raised a hand. Where is he? Joseph. Joseph Urlacher. What happened to you? Oh, here it is.
So I sent you a request.
So the problem is putting comments and questions in chat is that there are too many of them. There are already too many to answer. So
can you hear me now?
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can hear me now.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Adam is a manifestation of God. My understanding is that manifestations of God cannot sin. My understanding is that the book of Genesis says he did eat of the fruit, the forbidden fruit. Please comment. Sure.
All right. So first of all, there's an Adam that's in the Bible, that's in the book of Genesis, the second chapter. Then there are two Adams that are mentioned in the writings of the Bab. And there's an Adam that is mentioned in a tablet of Bahá'u'lláh. And who are all these Adams? They're different people. Because in the Hebrew language, Adam means man.
Yes.
Man. Okay. So the story that's found in Genesis is about it's a metaphorical man. It's a metaphor for all of humanity and for how humanity came to be in the pickle that it's in. Okay. Because the clear message of that chapter is that God made everything good. Everything is good, and it was meant to function beautifully, perfectly, in fact. And human beings were told, as long as you go along with the way things are created, everything will be fine for you. But avoid this particular thing. And that particular thing is going to make you doubt whether doing it God's way is the best way. And it's going to make you and so you don't even want to think about going in that direction. Don't do that. How many times
are you saying there should be no knowledge? You're saying there should be no knowledge of good and evil? That's a forbidden thing?
What I'm saying is that this is a metaphorical, this is a teaching story. And the teaching story is meant for our edification. And there's not one meaning to it. There are many meanings to it. And Abdu'l-Baha made that very clear in his talk and some answered questions when he gave a beautiful description of one of the meanings and then ended by saying, there are many more. Go and think about it. Go and find them. And
so is one of them that man should not have knowledge of good and evil?
No, I don't think
That
I
we-
don't think that anybody would say that, and certainly that the Baha'i writings don't say that. Let's not talk just about Adam and Eve in the garden, because I think other people will have other things they want to bring up.
Okay.
And
Could you tell me?
by the way, I think
Oh.
that is a topic that deserves to have a whole presentation on one of these gatherings. And so if somebody else wants to do it, and there are plenty of people who are very well, much better qualified than me, great. And if nobody volunteers, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But let's
Does your
Joe,
does your talk on Bereshit go into this?
Yeah, I talked about it in Bereshit. Yeah.
Okay, I'll listen to that then. Thank you.
Okay. So who wants to jump in?
So there's a question that came up about Moses and the famous story before he went to the desert, and the time he defended a slave, and it ended in the death of one of the slavers. I know as well with current events, there's sometimes questions about the dispensation of Muhammad and the time that Muhammad also spent in these defensive wars that, again, the savages of the Arabian Peninsula wanted to kill every last person who believed in God, in Islam. Now, we have these different parts of history where clearly there is, in the Ten Commandments, the rule, thou shalt not kill. However, you've got these examples where Moses himself had, in defense of another, engaged in what some may deem, because of their lack of understanding in the subject, a murder. However, we understand that there's a lot of nuance to the subject. My question to you is, how do these manifestations of God that we believe, again, Moses, Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, all of these to be manifestations of God on earth, how do we reconcile, how do we understand the difference between these defensive actions of the life of others and the clear reality that there's a commandment that thou shalt not kill? And further, a step further, as Baha'is, we're not supposed to, of course, take up arms to spread the faith. We're not supposed to use weapons to defend ourselves for our faith. How do we reconcile all of this with what Baha'u'lláh now tells us and the past of human history?
Okay, it comes back to the covenant. And that's, of course, my topic today. It comes back to these two covenants. The covenant of God with humanity, all of humanity throughout eternity. And then the covenant of Baha'u'lláh with his followers. Okay? In both cases, there are expectations set forth by God. These are not invented by the manifestation. He is a vehicle for the revelation of God. So the expectations of humanity as a whole in every dispensation are much broader, and they're in some ways, I would say in some ways they're less challenging than those of Baha'u'lláh in particular, because Baha'u'lláh expects that his followers are going to follow the greater covenant of God and his covenant. It's not either or for Baha'is. Baha'is have both obligations, and the obligations are equally important. Because if we're not adhering to the essential teachings of religion, then, and we're just doing whatever Baha'u'lláh calls upon us to do, then we've missed out. We've missed out because Baha'u'lláh is the greatest expounder of the essential covenant of God that has ever existed. His writings are filled with references to this greater covenant. In fact, most of his writings are. Most of his writings are about what the obligations are of humanity, not of Baha'is. The things that he wanted Baha'is to address in particular are contained in the Kitabi Aqdas, are contained in the Kitabi Ad. And those are addressed specifically to us, right? So now, one of the things, and Cyrus, I'm going to get to you and I'm going to get to Stephen. Just give me a minute here. So what you have in the guidance from the manifestation is how human beings are expected to behave. That's what's clearly explained to us. When we as human beings then look at what God does and what a manifestation does, and we say, well, how come he's not doing what he says that I should do? How come? Haven't you heard that from your children? Haven't you? I have. Every day I hear it from my children. Why can't I do such and such? You do it, so why can't I do it? Because you're a child. Because you are not mature. Because you cannot make decisions for yourself yet. This is going to be a gradual process where you are going to get more and more freedom, but eventually you will come to understand that that freedom is balanced with responsibility, right? In other words, there are consequences. You want freedom, you have to face the consequences of what needs to happen. And so every single time that somebody has made some derogatory comment about a manifestation, the manifestation has responded. It's not for you to judge the manifestation. It is for the manifestation to judge you. And the same thing applies, obviously, to God. You know, it's not our role to go and say, God has really messed up in his design of the universe because we have hurricanes, right? And because there are earthquakes and those kill people. So he's bad. He's a bad manager. He should have done it differently. No, this is that rebellious streak that we have where we want someone else to take responsibility rather than understanding as human beings that we have a choice to live in an earthquake zone. We have a choice to live close to the coast of a sea, of an ocean. And we also have a choice to create technology that can mitigate, that can warn us before a tsunami hits, and that can also warn us when a likely earthquake is going to hit. So these are choices that we have, and God gave us those choices. And so if we don't act upon the choices and terrible things happen, then we have only ourselves to blame. We don't like blaming ourselves. We don't like taking responsibility for our own behavior. But I want to address something that's going to be asked right away. How about those people who are being massacred in the Holy Land? How about the ones that were killed in Israel? How about the ones that are being killed in Gaza? How about them? Do they have any choice in the matter? Of course they do. They do have choices, and their parents have choices. But there's another aspect to this, and that is we don't know what happens to people who die in terrible circumstances, whether it's natural disaster or whether it's war. We don't know. But what we should be able to trust, because of our loving and trusting relationship with God, is he's taking care of people who didn't do anything wrong. And they have eternity. They've gone to eternity quicker than we did. And we should never imagine for a moment that those children and those women and there's old people and all the other people who have died that didn't do anything bad, that they won't receive recompense in the next world. How can we consider that God would be so unthinking, unfeeling, unjust? No, we can't. We have to believe that there's a reason for them going and that they are getting compensation for the fact that they missed out on part of this life. And that's just a matter of this trust too. The covenant is about trust. We have to trust that God has our best interests in mind. Always, every single time. When somebody dies, we treat it as if it's a tragedy. No, it's not a tragedy. They're going to go. Every single one of us is going to go. You know, the real question is, are they going to go and be happy in the next world? That's all that matters. It's the only thing that matters. And you know, that's why we're encouraged to pray for people who have crossed over, because we can influence their lives in the next world by our prayers and by our loving commitment to doing works in their honor. We know this. We've been told this. That's where our action component comes into it. So, Cyrus, I think you were before Stephen, so I'm going to acknowledge you first. Please go ahead.
Hello, Paul. I'm Cyrus from Fremont, California. And just I had a request, about what I thought was the main topics about the action of seven Baha'is, and to know more about the circumstances under which it took place. Of course, all of us understood and we knew that it's not a model for the Baha'is for others to imitate. And the law of God is very clear about this. And but we are not sitting at the judgment in the actions of others, because what Baha'u'lláh mentioned is for us to judge ourselves and not others. But anyway, knowing about the circumstances, I think is what we need to talk more about that. And
So Cyrus, to address your question, Dr. Nejati Al-Khan has studied this question so thoroughly that I can state with confidence that there's nobody in the world today who knows more about this subject than he does.
Yes.
And I am not speaking in his place. I am not going to talk about this topic, because he will come back and he will give you a talk about this specific instance, and you will learn all of the facts, because he's collected them all. This is a matter that he studied very carefully. And secondly, I want to address that the judgment that what they did is wrong doesn't come from me. It comes from Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh was very, very severe in his condemnation of that action, and he was also deeply wounded, because these Baha'is were faithful followers of his. They were living with his family. They were living in the same community. And then they do this thing that they must have known would be very displeasing to him. So this is about his feelings and his judgment, not mine. No, you're right. No human being has the right to go and poke into somebody else's business. But we must acknowledge what the manifestation of God has said about the actions of ourselves, the actions of every one of us, because that judgment of God is a reality. God does not just let everything slip and it's okay. You were having a bad hair day, so you decided to pick up your AK-47 and shoot people. No. That's not justice. How can we even talk about justice as an abstract principle if we don't recognize that there are boundaries and they have to be held? And the one to hold them and the one to maintain the hold is the manifestation, because he has the ultimate knowledge. He has the knowledge of the whole context of the situation, And Baha'u'lláh, on this particular point, did not say, oh, it's okay, they were bad guys, so it's okay that you killed them, right? And so it wasn't okay. And it wasn't okay for so many different reasons, like the fact that it endangered the lives of the Baha'i community, that endangered the life of Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha. Those are just sort of, but in principle, it was a wrong thing to do, and they should have known better. And they were carried away by their passion and their love for Baha'u'lláh, sure, but look, plenty of people do things for the love of a manifestation that are completely contrary to the teachings of the manifestation. We say, well, I love God, and then we do things that are completely against what God wants us to do. So we have to be careful that our feelings and our actions are actually in harmony with what God has revealed to us, the standards he has revealed, so that we're not sort of indulging the feelings above everything, because the feelings are not the most important thing in the world. That's why we have rational minds too, is to stop and say, wait a second, is this consistent? Is this consistent with the Baha'i teachings? No. So I'm not going to do it. I feel like doing it, and I haven't noticed that, we all have our feelings, and our feelings come and go. And it's a matter of, do you actually act on a feeling that is contrary to the law of God? That's the danger.
That's right.
Stephen.
Yes. But I think there is a misunderstanding. I'm not defending the action of,
I
these
understand.
Baha'is, and also I'm not saying that, because it's not my business, and it's nobody's business, to say that what they did was right or wrong. For ourselves, of course, we can say that this action is not something which I should do. But since we are result of judgment is made, that's what the circumstances must be made more clear. And as far as I know, the Baha'u'lláh did not condemn it as strongly as some think. And
As I said,
we shall wait to see the listen
Yeah.
to talk, and then
he will present
Yes.
all of the evidence so that you see what was said.
That's right. Thank you.
Sure. So go ahead, please, Stephen.
Yeah, hello, Dr. Terry, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Don't you dare call me
you're
Dr.
not a
Terry.
doctor?
I have
Oh,
no
you're not?
doctorate.
Well, you have a doctorate in life then.
No, I'm
one-
just old.
Well, there's that problem. I'm getting that problem myself a little bit. You mentioned that there's the covenant, and then there are the implications of the covenant. So they're like add-ons, I don't know, dependencies of the covenant. Like, for example, avoidance of mischief, I believe, is one of them, and obedience to government, in Baha'u'llah's case at least, is a direct consequence of the covenant. This is all the divine law includes avoiding the appearance of mischief and obedience to government. Does that sound about right?
Well, I honestly, I remember years ago when I first encountered this. It's a letter that was written on behalf of the Guardian, and it was describing how to understand the Baha'i teachings, and it was revolutionary for me. Literally, it was revolutionary. At the same time, I immediately said, yes, this is what I've been looking for, is an image for what I know is the right way to do it. And what he talks about in that is that the teachings are like a sphere, and you have one teaching is on one point of the sphere, and then there's another teaching on the other point of the sphere, and it looks like they contradict each other, but they don't, because there are all these connections through the sphere.
Right.
To me, like, that image has been hugely important for my life.
And I agree. It's a very important. So it's hard to take one point and say, I've got the whole idea, but
exactly. So the covenant, in a very real sense, Baha'u'llah's covenant with us is every law, every admonition, every request. That's part of the covenant. That's our covenant with Baha'u'llah.
Right.
But in particular, there are things that are part of this covenant that are, how shall I put it? They're they're prioritized because if we do not go with the choice of the manifestation or the choice of his appointed leader of the faith, then the whole enterprise comes to a crash. The
Agreed.
whole thing.
Right.
If the Baha'is had not followed Abdu'l-Baha and instead had just everybody does his own thing, there would be no Baha'i faith now. It wouldn't exist.
Right.
It just wouldn't exist. And, you know, and there's this, and the master actually talks about this in the tablets of the divine plan. He says, if there wasn't a center of the covenant, every Baha'i would take his own position and the faith would be lost.
Right.
And not just the power of the faith, but the faith itself, because we wouldn't be one community. We'd be 1,000 communities.
Right.
I mean, look at Christians now. The number of denominations now in Christianity exceeds 50,000. How are those
Not to
people
mention
ever
each church
going
can
to come
split.
together?
Right.
Exactly. It's like every church is splitting again. I mean, you read about it in the you know, in the news every day. The church is going to split into 3 different groups, okay? But that church that split was a split from a previous split. Like blip, blip, blip. You know,
Yep.
Martin
Yeah.
Luther never intended for there to be a split, by the way.
Right.
He didn't. He got expelled. He got excommunicated. And then his followers started their own thing. Well, we're not going to do that. Okay? If somebody gets expelled from our community, he's not going to start his own Baha'i faith.
Right.
There have been a few attempts, but they're laughable. Seriously. You know, if you have any doubts about this, go and read. There's a wonderful doctoral dissertation on it by what is his name? Elvin Johnson. It's available on Baha'i Library online. You can read the whole thing about all of the kooky covenant breakers in America. They're, you know, they're a handful of people, and their rationale for branching out and doing their own thing has no grounds at all in the writings. None.
Right.
It's just like vacuous, you know, and you know,
Right.
and you know, the attempts of Ahmad Sorab, you know, and of Herigel in Germany. It's just like nothing. It's just fluff is what it is. It's
Right.
fluff.
Goes away quick.
You know, and the master called it, it's like foam on the waves that comes into the beach, you know.
Right.
Exactly. So the foam, you know, it's just going to be blown off by the wind.
Right, but I wanted to talk about a tendency. So when we have the covenant and the manifestation, then you have this tension where people want, you know, the behavior of Moses to be transparently clear to them, or Christ, or, you know, was he a rebel or was he a sacrifice, and what was going on. But with manifestations, these rise to theological implications, and people argue positions and all of that. But it can get messy or weird in the particulars of life, where you don't have someone clear cut like a manifestation, but it can be clear cut in other ways. So, for example, I have written a paper about a Baha'i who was murdered in 1936. Innocent Baha'i murdered, not his fault, her fault. But the implications start getting messy, because in this particular case, the police began chasing who's the criminal, and they ultimately decided a black man was responsible and executed him all the way through to execution, legal process that went all the way through. But the implications of the most vital and challenging issue in American history are present. And even at the time, there were people starting to say, no, you've got the wrong man, you executed the wrong man. But the story of the Baha'i who was murdered gets lost, and she just becomes a victim in the story. And we just start talking about what was the execution, the process of finding the right guy. And then later it's like, wait, this is not the right man, he's the wrong man. But always it's just this Baha'i was murdered. And there's an avoidance, there's a vacuum of wanting to say, let's remember Helen Clevenger, who was killed, and she led a good life, and this is her life. There are books that have been published recently in 2021 analyzing this case in 1936 and presenting all the facts, but it still perpetuates this She's a victim. She was a Baha'i. She was too trusting and left her door unlocked, which is, there's no such thing in Baha'i law or Baha'i practice anywhere that Baha'is just don't lock their doors. And that makes them culpable for being the victims of the crime, right? So someone tried your door, found it open, and now you're the victim. Even if that's a practice, which is not, the story becomes this muddied question of how do we deal with it as a community? Do we talk about this? It's hard because the legal system is pursuing its sense of justice, and at the time found someone and executed him. And now we're still talking about it 60 years later, and books are being published about it, and they probably arrested the wrong man and all of that. But everywhere, you just have this little bit of the Baha'i is the victim, right? And there's this avoidance of wanting to talk about and celebrate the person who was killed. It becomes this, well, this terrible thing happened. We don't want to be in the appearance of mischief, of calling the sheriff a bad investigator or the bad society or what's going on with Black people. It all becomes noise and difference of opinion and argumentation. So there's this avoidance. You know what I'm talking about? Have I sort of stated it?
No. So Stephen, I'm going to bring it back to the covenant, to the two covenants. Okay. Right. And the reason why I'm going to bring it back to the two covenants is that there are salient facts here. A particular person was killed. Okay. Which means, and this is, emotionally we get very carried away by this business of killing, but it's actually what it means is they went to the next world before they expected to. Okay. Right. They caught the early train. Whether they wanted to or not, they took the early flight. Okay. That's what happened. We're all going there anyway. Right. So if we look at it from the human point of view that doesn't believe in the next world or is not sure about there being a next world, it could be a tragedy. It's not really a tragedy when you consider it from the point of view of we're all going there and this person went early because we don't know the circumstances of what happens to souls that go early. We don't know. Sure. But as Abdu'l-Baha talked about this in a number of tablets to women who had lost children, and not just babies, but children, he says, the reception of those souls in the next world is beyond your understanding. They are received with so much love, with so much, they are being parented, if you will, by all of these other souls in that world. And so you should not, pray for them. Yes. Pray that they will pray for you. Right.
Sure.
But don't. So one of the things that you've discovered is this person went early to the next world and she was, to all accounts, a good Baha'i. Well, Ya Bahá'u'lláh, let's pray for her. Let's cultivate a relationship with that soul because someday we'll meet her. Hopefully. I want to meet her. Yeah. I mean, and then there's who did it. We don't really know who did it. The person who was, arrested, convicted, executed may not have done it. If he didn't do it, he's not getting punished in the next world. He took an early flight too. Right. And his early flight, he's going to be surrounded by love and acceptance as well, to the degree to which he lived a good life, and to the degree to which people pray for his soul. That's just a reality. Those are facts. Okay. Whether the system screwed up or not, oh, well, we all know that the system screwed up a whole lot back in those days, and it still screws up a lot in our own time. Right. And I think one of the things that Baha'u'lláh says that's so refreshing is, be ye concerned with the problems of your time. You can't do anything about what happened in the past, and there's a whole lot of it we can't understand. like when all of these accounts about what manifestations did or didn't do. We shouldn't get hung up in that and think that we're in a position to understand a whole lot of things that happened. We aren't. Maybe in the next world we will. It's possible. But what we can understand in this world is that if manifestation, according to Baha'u'lláh, has the most great infallibility, and that this is the only soul that is selected by God to transmit his revelation to humanity, well, maybe we ought to not be judging him. You know, I mean, especially if we're not supposed to be judging each other. Maybe we ought to be not judging him, you know, and maybe if we're not supposed to be judging each other, we shouldn't be judging God who created us and say, well, how come I wasn't born with curly hair? You know, like, you know, didn't God understand that I would want to be 5'2" instead of 6'2"? We human beings are full of complaints, and the degree to which we commit ourselves to these two covenants, the covenant of God and the covenant of Baha'u'lláh, are the degree to which we're going to find happiness and we're going to find fulfillment. And whenever we arrive in the next world, whether it's the next plane or the plane in 2 weeks or in 2 years or in 2 decades, we're going to be happy. We will have gotten to the destination that we really wanted to arrive at. And I think it's always a matter of perspective. We can always look at things and you know, pick out those things that we don't like, that we're not comfortable with. Or we can say, this is beyond me. A greater one than me has created the world and how it functions. And whatever I can fix and make better, I will. And for all the rest, I have to trust that either other people will or that God will make it happen. John?
Thank you.
John, you have that smile. I think that smile is going to tell me to shut up pretty soon, right?
You're hilarious, Peter, but you're not too far off, though. It is about that time. It's about 12:30 almost, and it's a good time for us to close out for the night. So if you have any final remarks, we would appreciate it. And we're going to close out and again, wish everyone a beautiful Sunday.
Well, Jeremiah gave me a call about 3 hours ago and asked me if I could fill in for my dear friend Najati Al-Khan, and I'm really glad I did. So I'm wonderful seeing all of you and talking with you, and I look forward to another opportunity in the future.
We are so grateful that you're able to show up here today on such short notice, Peter. Really, you're the most valuable person today getting all this going. We appreciate it so much. And we send prayers as well for Dr. Al-Khan's family because he was unable to make it today. For that reason, we send him prayers. And lastly, we welcome all of you to next Sunday as we are going to have another speaker. Dr. Al-Khan will be speaking on the same subject in January. So we welcome to please sit tight and wait for January when we will discuss the subject we planned originally today. But for all intents and purposes, let's look at clearwaterbaha'is.org for next week's presenter. We welcome all of you to please register for a Zoom session. If you can't do that, we're more than happy to have you as our YouTube viewer or Facebook viewer. Again, look up Clearwater Baha'is on YouTube. Please like, please subscribe. We appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful afternoon.